All right. Tougies Take episode 36, Friday, June 25th. The Habs have clinched. They are in the finals, much to the chagrin of really a lot of people. I feel like most Canadians have real mixed feelings about this.
I mean, it does seem to be 50-50 in my experience. Some people are just like, LOL, no, I'm not rooting for the Habs, even if it's a Canadian team, because who the hell cares if it's a Canadian team? I consider them all rivals. And let's be honest, Quebec has wanted to secede from Canada for a very, very long time. The other side is like, yeah, any Canadian team would be nice. I don't understand those people, but hey, to each their own.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. Well, in some ways, this is like a sports miracle. And when sports miracles happen, people go crazy. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but last night, 12 people were arrested. A police car was flipped. And they went nuts in Montreal.
As they do.
So today's Warmies segment is going to be centered around one of my favorite things in all of sports, because I think it's scary, but it's ridiculous at the same time. And that is sports riots.
All right.
Are you ready?
No, but let's go anyway.
Okay. June 6th,
Let me just say, for those watching on the video side of things, I'd just like to point out Thunderbug in the background on DJ.
Oh, he's on his last leg. It's game 7.
Talking about sports riots, and it's just Thunderbug in the background of DJ's video, just looking like he's dead. Oh, anyway.
He's remembering that 8-0 game, hoping Kucherov plays tonight.
Indeed.
June 6th, 1974. MLB game, Texas versus Cleveland. So this game was forfeited in the 9th because of a riot. And this riot was caused by charging this much per beer.
$10 beers?
Oh, it was 10-cent beer night.
Oh, that would make sense.
With a purchase limit of 6 at a time. You could only spend 60 cents at once. And
I had a feeling it was going to be the price was more low than anything. But honestly, the first time you mentioned like a baseball beer riot, or not even just a beer riot, but just a baseball riot. And I my mind immediately went to the whole disco sucks riot. But yeah, no, lower beer cost makes more sense.
Yeah, that's a 10-cent beer night. They had a limit of 6 per purchase, but you could purchase as many times as you want. And I think my favorite part is that this riot, like if you go to look it up in history, is only called 10-cent beer night. Like it's the only one that happened in history, and it led to a riot. So let's get to what is widely considered the worst riot in sports history. In terms of property damage, the amount of people that died. But the circumstances are so ridiculous, it's worth bringing up. So in 532 AD, so this is a throwback, 30,000 people died, and half of Constantinople was burned because of this sport.
I mean, I thought you were going to say Rome, so my mind went to chariots.
Constantinople was the capital of Rome at this point. It was after the East-West separation.
Oh, okay. Fair enough, yeah. Why do I get a feeling it's just something incredibly dumb? Let's go with mud wrestling.
Oh, if only. So it was chariot racing.
God, I know my Rome. I blew it anyway.
What happened was the extremely popular team, the Greens, lost the championship to another team called the Blues. And everyone hated the Blues except for the Roman Emperor. So all the people revolted.
I can really relate to the fans of the Greens, given the events of a few years ago.
It's like, can you imagine if it came out that like the the governor of Ontario was a Habs fan. That's essentially like, and just they burned down 50% of the buildings in Constantinople because the emperor rooted for the wrong team. All right,
don't give people any ideas when it comes to Trudeau, okay?
Yeah, right. Well, this one we'll go back to Montreal for this one.
Okay.
So in 1955, on March 17th, this player was suspended by the NHL, causing a riot in Montreal that was named after him.
Ooh, you said 85?
55.
55, Jesus. Oh, God, is it Henri Richard? It was where he got taken out of the game by what's-his-face, Campbell. Was it Henri Richard? Was it Maurice Richard?
It was Maurice Richard. Okay. Yes, it was the Richard riot.
Yeah. Yeah, because the title, if you don't know, would make you think that it was somebody on the opposite team, like a Ty Domi going up into the stands. But if I'm not mistaken, and you'll tell us the story in a second, it was that he was either pulled from the game, ejected from the game, whatever, and people were not happy.
So it basically something happened. They don't really get into the details, but he hit a linesman, and was ejected from the game.
Dennis Weidman of his time.
Yeah. So what's interesting was basically this riot was caused because the suspension was so severe compared to other incidents, and basically the riot was caused because they thought he was only punished this way because he was French Canadian. And an interesting fact about Maurice Richard, who the Rocket Richard Trophy is named after, he actually never won a goal scoring title. And in 54-55, likely would have won it if not for this suspension.
So the lesson here is that Habs fans, for as long as we've been around, and for most of us, our parents and maybe even grandparents, of course, as well, for as long as the Earth has revolved around the sun, Habs fans have complained about bias against them.
Yeah.
That's my takeaway from that story.
Yeah. I mean, apparently the ref was yelling French ethnic slurs at the players during. So that also does it.
Yeah. That could have been a contributing factor.
Yeah, that'll change the color we view this incident through. So the next one I'll get to is another baseball incident. White Sox versus Tigers, July 1979. So at this time, your average MLB game had a 2,000 to 5,000 player attendance. 50,000 people showed up to this game because of shock jock Steve Dahl, who hated this type of music.
Disco sucks, baby.
Yeah, that is correct. This is the disco riot.
Yeah.
Basic disco demolition night is what the promotion was called. So yeah. Steve Dahl, a shock jock for a rock radio station who absolutely hates disco, he showed up with the idea of just putting a bunch of dynamite on top of disco records and blowing it up. So what happened was staff did not collect all the records. So people were just throwing them like frisbees from the stands down at the field like the players. And then finally, after the first game of a doubleheader, where they're at 10 times their expected capacity, Dahl walks out into the outfield, dressed in full army fatigues and a helmet, blows up the records, and the Sox had to forfeit the second game of the doubleheader because of the crater left in the outfield.
God, I'm very familiar with this particular story, but it's one of those things where I'm sure if you tell someone, and obviously there are going to be people who listen to this, there are going to be people, it's like, how was this real? This actually happened.
Yeah, people were
one of the most bizarre things encompassed in the world of sports I think I've ever heard of.
Well, so this one we're going to go a little bit later. And this is the final question. November 8th, 1963, at Roosevelt Raceway, there is a horrific crash causing only 2 contestants to finish the race. All 23,000 fans in attendance are upset. They jump the railing. They attack the judges' booth. What sport?
Can I get a date on this again?
It's 1963, and it's a type of race.
My mind went to horse racing.
Yeah, that's correct. It is horse racing. So 23,000 people start rioting. And I was laughing to myself in the in the pre-show when I was talking to Tougie about what. And so I didn't want to reveal this, but it's so funny to me. So all these fans, they jump over the railing. They attack the judges' booth. Firemen arrive to set their hoses on the rioters. And the rioters respond by lighting fires to taunt the firemen. And that's what I was laughing at.
I mean, it's a hell of a way to get your point across.
Just lighting fires to taunt firemen is really funny to me.
Oh, the stones, by the way, on those people.
I mean, it was probably 23,000 to 12.
Yeah. But they tried.
They certainly tried. Yeah, so that was just the, handpicked some sports riots. I didn't realize the Vancouver Canucks have actually had 2 riots over losing the Stanley Cup Finals.
Yeah. Yes, they have. I mean, there was a decent amount of talk on stream last night when the Habs won about riots, and obviously, like, Vancouver's always brought up. And I mean, we'll talk about it now instead of a little bit later on because it was going to come up. I mean, obviously, like, you had what went on outside the arena. Fans got held in the arena because so much was going on. From my understanding, in terms of like the cop car being flipped, it was in response to people getting tear gassed by the cops. Like, it was just, it was a mess. It was a combustible situation that you knew was going to end up with some issues. Whether or not you want to use the term riot last night for Montreal, I don't know. But at the end of the day, I mean, obviously, I'm of the standpoint it wouldn't matter if it's in Boston or not, but just the idea of destroying your own crap over sports, I don't get. Now, obviously, if you want to get into a more serious discussion over protests that turn violent and destructible and why that might happen, and if it's an influence of a negative crowd, whatever, same thing could be applied here. Was it just a couple of shitty people that started doing stuff that kind of ruined the fun for everyone? Let's be honest, likely so. But I never really did understand that idea of just, hey, my sports team won, like in Montreal in '93, or when the Philadelphia Eagles won. Let's destroy a bunch of shit. Oh, my team lost. Like Montreal all the time. Vancouver in 2014 and 2011. I don't understand it. I just don't.
Yeah, that's why it's good to not have your arena downtown. I think that is the main drawback of having a downtown arena. Is, you just pour out onto the streets, ready to be angry. But what you
Ottawa's
can do.
got it right. We need a stadium and a cornfield.
Yeah, give them a nice drive home, to cool off. But sometimes you got to clean up your downtown arena so this doesn't happen. I feel like if you want to clean up your downtown arena, you can use code Tougie for 20% off at manscaped.com. Manscaped.com, home of the Lawnmower 4.0, home of the Weed Whacker.
Home of the new Ultra Smooth package.
Oh, yeah.
Shaving care for down there. They're constantly innovating, constantly releasing new products. And it's amazing how they just keep making these things happen.
I thought it was like a weird idea at first, but then when I used it, it made a lot of sense. The Ultra Smooth package actually comes with clear shaving cream, which makes a ton of sense.
Doesn't it?
It really does.
As opposed to best guess.
Yeah, right. Best guess. Pretty sure we got there. So yeah, use code Tougie, 20% off. Manscaped.com. Manscaped, your balls will thank you.
To the intro.
This is the intro now.
All right, and we're back from the intro.
Old disco sucks.
The old disco sucks. We are going to create a crater. The field manager will have a literal field day with what he needs to fix. So we'll get to our next segment. Viewer questions brought to you by viewers like you. Tougie, go ahead. Let's hit us with something.
Yeah, so very Montreal-centric, as you would expect, as the majority of the podcast will be here today. It might end up being a shorter episode. We'll see how this one goes. Every time we think that, it often doesn't end up being the case. But again, before every show on Tuesdays and Fridays, I put out a tweet. You can also hit us up on the Patreon, of course, patreon.com/Tougie24, and on the Discord. There's a link in the description of every video that I have. And there is a podcast section, or podcast questions section on that particular Discord. First question today from a regular listener, One Broken Wheelchair. Is Carey Price the Conn Smythe winner so long as Montreal doesn't get blown out and swept? Now, there is an argument, obviously, in terms of how the Conn Smythe is going to go. I mean, for Montreal, Carey Price is definitely the favorite. Nick Suzuki, I think, deserves a decent little shout as well. Tyler Toffoli's up there, but, yeah. Carey Price is the guy. But here's the thing for me, I suppose. If the New York Islanders were to win, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, Game 7 is tonight. If the New York Islanders were to win, is there anybody I think that necessarily rivals Carey Price, even if the Habs were to lose, in terms of the importance to the team? I don't know. I mean, you have a lot of players, Barzal, Eberle, Beauvillier, Nelson, Bailey, JG Pajot, who have all been great, but have they been out of this world good like Carey Price has been in the playoffs? Not necessarily. So I think there's wiggle room to say that Carey Price could go full J.S. Giguère and win the Conn Smythe if the Islanders were to make it to the Cup final. If Tampa makes it to the Cup final, I'm sorry, there's no way. Because the idea of if Montreal loses against Tampa, can Carey still win the Conn Smythe? I don't think so. And that is because you have Braden Point on 20 points in 17 games with 14 goals in that time. And while we don't know his health status right now, Nikita Kucherov has 27 points in 17 playoff games. Andrei Vasilevsky as well has a .934 save percentage in these playoffs, equaling Carey Price's save percentage. So at the end of the day, I think it really does kind of hinge upon the idea of the Islanders making it through.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. It's either going to take a Habs win or an Islanders win for Carey Price to win the Conn Smythe.
Yeah, it's so difficult, right? It's so unlikely. I mean, you look back, to that 2003 Cup run for the Ducks when they ultimately lost to New Jersey, and why this idea, even though it was almost 20 years ago, was always thrown out there. Because of that ridiculous J.S. Giguère run. I mean, he had a .945 save percentage in 21 games, guys. A .945. That just, I mean, again, if we look up here too, the best save percentages, NHL playoffs. I mean, obviously, you've had some runs by Jonathan Quick. You've had some runs by the likes of Tim Thomas, but that J.S. Giguère run, that just really doesn't happen. The highest save percentage ever from a goaltender in the playoffs that at least made it to the finals, from what I can tell, is Jonathan Quick. He had that .946 in 2012 when the Kings won for the first time, equaling J.S. Giguère. Actually, I think it would be rounded up to a .946. That just doesn't happen. Ole Kolzig had a .941 in 1998 when the Caps made it to the finals. I think got swept by the Red Wings. Tim Thomas had that .940. Fun fact for, you know what? Why not bring it back to the Bruins? Deej, when Tim Thomas won the Stanley Cup in 2011, He had a 940 save percentage. Did you know that the year the Bruins lost to the Chicago Blackhawks in 2013, Tuukka Rask had a 940 save percentage?
Yeah, it's because he's not as good.
Yeah, no, he's not, clearly. Dang Fittens, got to go back over. Soft mentality. You like Metallica bullshit. Yeah, no, I always love that stat that Tuukka Rask had just as good of a save percentage, granted in 3 fewer games, but it's his fault that the Bruins lost to the Blackhawks and not the team in front of him that you could literally see quit on the ice. So, yeah, the odds of Carey Price winning the Conn Smythe, again, it's if the team loses, right? If the team wins, we'll talk about that. There's a pretty goddamn good chance Carey Price is winning the Conn Smythe. But if they lose, honestly, I think it depends on who they end up playing in the final.
Yeah, I agree completely. There's just, I mean, and even then Tampa, if they end up winning, or even just like if Tampa wins tonight, there's like 5 players that have to play rock, paper, scissors for the Conn Smythe.
It is pretty ridiculous. We'll move on to our second question here. This one comes from AJ. Who's been the best skater for the Habs so far, in your opinion? So, Deej, it depends on how you want to view it. I think we can both agree with that. If you look,
I would go with somebody all around. Like I wouldn't go with Suzuki or Caulfield because they're more.
So see, that's the thing.
Drivers.
Tyler Toffoli, leading this team in points with 14 points in 17 games. Do you give it to Tyler Toffoli? Like you said, Suzuki, 13 points in that time. Cole Caulfield has 9 points in 15 games. Granted, he's 20 years old and was great against Vegas. Then you factor in that second line for the Habs.
Yeah,
they have a combined 12 points, I do believe, between the three of them. But Arturi Lehkonen, Brendan Gallagher, and then Philip Deneau. And everyone's pointing. Philip Deneau has 3 points in 17 games. But there is no goddamn way the Habs are in the Stanley Cup final if it's not for Philip Deneau.
I think when you see these games and you look at the eye test, the 3 best players, in terms of the eye test, not like in terms of point production, like in terms of doing all the little things right on this team, are Philip Deneau, Brendan Gallagher, and Joel Armia.
Yeah, it's tough to disagree with. I mean, God, that fourth line, though, right? Like the importance of Eric Stahl and Corey Perry.
Yeah. I mean, I picked Joel Armia as the guy I think is the best skater, but just because he is getting it done on both sides of the ice and producing offensively, although not to the level of like Toffoli or Suzuki. And I think that's why I gave him a slight edge over Deneau, but it's hard to take away from Deneau that he has somehow become a premier defensive center in this league.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of thought was there with him in terms of his reputation as that premier defensive center before this season. And then I think it started to slip away a little bit for whatever reason. I don't really know what that reason is. But, you look over the past couple of years and, Philip Deneau is still very much that guy, and he's continued to show it now in this postseason. So that's the thing. In terms of that top skater, it really does depend on what you care to look at as an individual and what you prioritize over anything else. So
you got to pick one. Who do you pick?
I'm going to view it as, do they make it to the Cup final without this one person? Like, could they overcome the loss of this person? I think there's a lot of people that are in that description, but I believe Philip Deneau is on pace to set the record for the most defensive zone draws taken in the playoffs. They do not flat out make it if it's not for Philip Deneau's defensive contributions. He doesn't have to be the guy that's putting up points. He has his role, and he is doing it as good as I think we've seen anybody do it in a very long time. I mean, if this was Patrice Bergeron with this performance, let's be honest, granted, Bergeron has earned the accolades. If this was Ryan O'Reilly, a Stanley Cup winner, if he was having a performance like this, he would earn that reputation. Anze Kopitar, guys like that. I mean, if there was anybody still on the fence about how good Philip Deneau is, I think this changes and sets in stone his reputation. So I would go with Philip Deneau. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I still am. for me, it's a coin flip between Joel Armia and I believe Brendan Gallagher is one of the best wings in the NHL now.
I don't disagree.
I didn't believe that before. I thought he was like a little washed up and struggling. Maybe there were some concerns about his size to continue playing the game he played, but I think he's top 10 in the league easily with just all the intangibles he brings. And I think, I mean, I'll save this next part for the next question.
Okay, so we'll go to the master of the name change, whether it be Sergachev or currently Corey Perry is elite on the Discord. Besides the Habs defense is trash, what narrative are you interested to see be crushed? So, I mean, I was a strong proponent of this, and I still am, that Carey Price's regular season struggles cannot be simplified to just the team in front of him's trash, he's fine. I don't think that's accurately describing the situation that we've seen with the Habs over the last few years. We've had that conversation on this show. I've had this conversation everywhere. I'm sorry, but at any point in the past 5 years, has Montreal's defense been worse than Buffalo's? No. So why has Linus Ullmark been able to put up the numbers he has in Buffalo? At any point, has Montreal's defense been worse than the Arizona Coyotes? Maybe, but certainly not significantly. So why can Antti Ranta put up a .930 save percentage behind that team? I never bought that narrative that this defense was so atrocious that it would drag down Carey Price's standard of play in the regular season. Again, keep that in mind, the regular season. I am not going to sit here and say that starting in 2017, when those numbers really started to drop, granted 18-19, he was still good, and then the past 2 years in the regular season, he struggled. I'm not going to sit here and say that their defense was, just Nashville-esque in terms of that strong top three, but they were never trash. And I think now, I mean, as Sergachev kind of mentioned, that narrative is dead because we have seen this defense do what they've done. And that's still not to say that Montreal has the best defense in the world. I mean, you look at this defense on paper, it's not the best defense. It's the bottom defense out of the final three remaining teams. I don't think that's unfair to say. You look at what Tampa has, whether it be with what Victor Hedman can be when he's on his game, McDonough, Savard, Sergachev. You look at the Islanders with Pelech and Pulock. I mean, yes, Weber, Petrie, very solid. Sherratt, Edmondson as those defense first options, again, aren't terrible. I don't think you want to be paying them a combined $7 million. Just my opinion. But hey, maybe you do, because look at where they are. I think you could get them on cheaper deals is my point, and maybe get a little bit of help elsewhere. I digress. In terms of what narrative I'm excited to see die from here, I mean, the problem is I'm ecstatic that defense is trash, so that's why Carey's numbers were bad narrative. I'm ecstatic that that's over. It's kind of a tough call, because I guess I think, like, obviously, like, the narrative surrounding officiating, and I think you look to the blown icing call in Game 6 that hit off of Leonard's pad. You can't blame Chris Lee for that. Some people will still say, see, it was the Vegas agenda to try and get them to win, which, again, we talked about that in the last episode, which is horseshit. Because, again,
I don't know. Actually, I was not reffing that game.
Exactly. Also. I don't know. Actually, maybe that idea of the Vegas agenda is correct, because we all say the NHL is incompetent, and apparently they're so incompetent that they can't even fix games for Vegas right. Maybe people are correct. Maybe they are. Who's to say? I mean, yeah, but I don't even give any credence to that narrative, so I can't even say I'm excited to see that narrative end. I honestly, I mean, one that came to mind, at least for the Habs, is the idea of, I mean, two come to mind for Montreal. You don't need superstar level players to succeed. And at the end of the day, a $10 million goaltender might not be an automatic mistake.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I also think that I think that this isn't even something that we are going to see a narrative be crushed. I think this narrative has been crushed in the playoffs this year. And that's that a first round pick on a goaltender is a bad idea. When you look at the goalies that made the finals and you see how much they're getting paid, where they were drafted, all of a sudden it's a very good idea to draft a goalie in the first round. But I think the biggest narrative that you don't really see this said outright, but I think it's something that a lot of people don't acknowledge, is if you have a very good team on paper. So like Vegas and Toronto and Nashville. Well, Nashville, not so much. I think Toronto is a better example of this. So Vegas and Toronto, they both this year had the same Achilles heel. And you are not an elite team if you are not elite on special teams. And I don't know if you knew the exact numbers, but the Maple Leafs over the 7 games of the playoffs had a 13% on the power play.
Mm-hmm.
And do you care to take a guess at Vegas's power play percentage?
I don't know the percentage, but it's got to be in the toilet because they didn't score a single goal on the power play against Montreal.
This is so baffling to me. They have a 9.3. They have a single-digit percentage power play. So they are scoring roughly 1 goal for every 11 power plays. They can. It takes them over a whole period on a man advantage to score. That's crazy. And
I think the crazy thing is too, right, for the Habs as well. Like I accepted the fact that the Habs special teams units weren't great. Granted, again, in the regular season, as we pointed out on the show, Carey Price couldn't stop a goddamn beach ball on the kill. But the move that they made at the time to move on from Claude Julien and change up things with the assistants, I mean, my God, did that pay off in spades? Because, yeah, I think that is maybe, I don't want to say the biggest contributing factor, but the Habs are not here if the success on the power play and especially the PK are, slightly worse against them. Like, you talk about what a difference that would make, especially too, all those power play chances. I say all those power play chances. Vegas had 15 power plays in 6 games, which I don't think is outrageous. If Vegas, you talk about that PK being slightly worse for Montreal, Vegas probably wins that series because of how close that series was overall.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I agree. If they tap in, say, 2-3 goals, I would say the series is over in Vegas's favor. But so there's also a stat, right, that I think is interesting because I know if you're listening at home, you probably immediately thought of this when it comes to penalty killing percentages. So there's a stat called net PK percent where it basically extrapolates the amount of time you were on the penalty kill versus how many goals you stopped. And Vegas is still at 9.3% on the net penalty kill or on the net power play. So it's not like this is a stat where they just weren't on enough power plays. Toronto was 8.7 on their net power plays. And I don't really even know how this is possible, but Montreal's net penalty killing percentage is 102%. Don't know how that works.
They've scored because they've scored more shorthanded goals than they've allowed.
That makes sense.
On the PK. Yeah. I mean, I think the latest number was that they've allowed 3 goals. Yeah. I think they've killed 42 out of 45 was the total. But they've scored 4 shorthanded goals this postseason. It's one of the most ridiculous stat lines I've ever seen in the history of the sport. So aside from that, then, in terms of other narratives, because I was looking at the other 2 teams, when talking about the New York Islanders, the idea of what narrative am I excited to see die? The idea that defensive hockey is boring. I don't know.
Yeah, it's only when it's the Islanders, apparently.
I don't know what it was last year, but everyone being like, "Oh man, the Islanders and Dallas series, they're both dreadful to watch." Like, I was entertained. I enjoyed watching both of those series, and then the idea here of the Islanders and Tampa, and then what we saw in Montreal, Vegas, with the idea of Montreal being a more defensive, grind you down team, essentially. Like, there hasn't been a conference final matchup in the past 2 years that I haven't enjoyed. And I'd like to think that narrative is going to die. But more so, Deej, I'm looking forward to the narrative dying tonight that Tampa only won because they're $18 million over the cap because the New York Islanders are going to win.
Yeah, I mean, if the Islanders somehow pull this off tonight, it would be insane. That said, and I mean, we'll get to this more in depth later, but the Lightning very much do not perform well in game sevens.
So yeah, we will talk about that a little bit later, or we can jump into it now. We can get into that series and then come back to Montreal Vegas if you want, because that was kind of a good enough segue to get us there.
Okay, yeah. Let's talk about game seven. We can talk what Tampa looks like. Kucherov hurt. There's a lot to talk about here.
Right. So the one thing I'll mention off of what you said is what we pointed out in the last episode, and it's the stat that everyone's seen thrown around. The Tampa Bay Lightning have not lost back-to-back games in the playoffs since being swept by the Columbus Blue Jackets. And there is, I mean, I said it earlier this week. I'm like, there's just, I cannot see the New York Islanders beating them twice in a row. But boy, if you asked me to bet on the Tampa Bay Lightning tonight, I would not be as confident heading into this game seven as I would have been just a few days ago. And it's because of that never say die, attitude from the Islanders, where you look back at game six on Wednesday night, and it was another really close game, obviously highlighted by the Kucherov non-call, but it looked like the Islanders were dead in the water. I got to be honest. Like, Braden Point scored in the first period because, of course, he does. He has 14 goddamn goals in the playoffs.
He's a monster.
I can't believe how good. I still can't believe how good he is. Anthony Cirelli scored as well, and it's like, oh, cool. We're halfway through the game. The Lightning are up 2-0. Like, this is done. And then Jordan Eberle, less than 2 minutes later, after Cirelli scored a fantastic goal. And then third period, Scott Mayfield, of all people, ties it on a bit of a weird one. And then the Islanders win in a minute and 8 seconds into that overtime. And then all of a sudden, you're starting to think, hey, maybe. And then the Habs win. And now you're just like, oh, God, this could happen. We could get an Islanders-Habs final. Especially, again, we don't know if Kucherov is going to play. The word is from John Cooper that it's a game time decision, but we have no idea if he's going to play tonight. So, Deej, I don't know if you had any thoughts specifically on game six, or if you just want to jump into talking about what we think might happen in game seven.
Well, so I mean, I think the weirdest thing for me is game six is, obviously the streak was unsustainable, but it snapped Vasilevsky's game six shutout streak that he had been on since last year when he won the cup against Dallas. And I think when you combine that with what happens in game seven, that said, Kucherov's going to be playing tonight. That's the only reason they're even giving doubt is to give the Islanders hope that they don't have to play against the best player, and then to get in their heads a little bit when they see him on the ice.
Could very well be that, yeah. And talking about the play, though, we talked about this all season long. Cross-checks and them not being called, and how it was going to lead to somebody getting hurt. And what do you know? Nikita Kucherov gets hurt.
Yeah, and especially this cross-check, right? Like, these are professional hockey players. Anytime you get hit by a professional hockey player, it's going to hurt a little bit. But this particular cross-check was just, it was an intent to injure. Like, there was this was not an attempt to do anything other than take out the best player on the Tampa Bay Lightning, which is what I think, like, not to vilify anybody involved, although, to be honest, it's a dick move, right? But I think the issue is when you go all this time without calling it, it just escalates and escalates. Yeah. And what can I get away with now? What can I get away with now? And then all of a sudden, regardless of your fandom, Nikita Kucherov is fun to watch on the ice because he is doing things that other people are incapable of, or incapable. I don't know which word's correct, but he just absolutely, he does things on the ice that nobody else can do in terms of his passing, his fake shots, his power play acumen, how he sets up other players and sees the game. And he's so much fun to watch. And so the NHL, because of their bad refereeing, is now suffering the fact that one of the most fun players to watch might not be involved in what is likely to be their most watched game for a while tonight.
Yeah, this is This is exactly the situation that we thought we would see. That's the only real way to explain it. I mean, that constant escalation, like you said, of especially in the playoffs, even more so. I mean, the regular season, we continue to see increased examples of this. And then you get into the playoffs, and of course, it's going to be even worse. It is a further piece of evidence to show that this league is a bit of a clown show. When it comes to officiating, there's, harsher words to say it with, but yeah, it's in a real bad way. We all know this. It doesn't affect one team more than the other in theory. I mean, it might, at the end of the day, you might get screwed a little bit more here or there, but at the end of the day, universally, as we all know, the officiating is crap because the NHL is ungood, which is a term I use at times to describe certain aspects of the EA NHL series. Not bad, but it's ungood. The NHL in general is ungood when it comes to their standard of officiating. So we can't really be surprised. And I mean, you look back at the Barzell 5K fine after, cross-checking en route in the head, or at least attempting to. I don't think he got all of it, of course, which doesn't really matter. It's more about the intent rather than the outcome of the injury. But, hey, I think regular season he would have gotten a game or two. But it's the playoffs and a 5K fine and the ejection from the game. That's like a 1-game suspension in the regular season, which that logic needs. You know what narrative I want to die? I don't even think it's a narrative, but I want that logic to die. Please, God. The idea of missing power or missing playoff games and the equivalent of what a regular season game would be, not a big fan. Yeah. At the end of the day, all of this crap, it leads to the New York Islanders probably having a better chance at winning this series. So why wouldn't you cross-check Nikita Kucherov?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that that's the way it should be and that there should be an open season on star players. That stat was thrown around a lot. Connor McDavid hasn't drawn a penalty in the last 2 postseasons in the appearances for the Edmonton Oilers. But I said it weeks ago. I said it months ago. I said it days ago. The NHL acts as if they are trying to promote the skill of the game, when in reality, they are very much not. And they're trying to go back to the playbook of promoting the sport in the way that they did in the past. Which is, I mean, no less blood and guts, essentially.
Yeah. And I don't know. It's such a shame. And I know I've brought this up before, but if other sports refed their games this way, like I know, when we talked about the NFL, there was that one huge mistake with pass interference, and they dedicated a whole conference to how can we fix this. Mm-hmm. And then they instituted those challenges. But now, it's just ridiculous because games are defined by rules. I mean, I know I bring that up again and again. And if you change the rules, it's a different game. So the Stanley Cup is no longer awarded to the best hockey team. It's awarded to the best playoff hockey team, which I don't think is really what anybody wants. I mean, on paper, that can sound good until you really sit down and think about it. And I mean, Kucherov here, one of the best players in the world, is injured. And something else I wanted to bring up on this note is it's almost 5 p.m. as we're talking. 3 hours before this game. So I actually read an article about what goes into finding out what players are in the lineup. And this was around the time that Jeff Petrie, when they weren't sure if he was coming back for the Habs. And it was talking about what the Montreal news media was doing in terms of how can we find out if Petrie's playing tonight. And it's crazy. The way they found out that Petrie was going to be cleared for the game was they had a photographer pose as a sports photographer with a telescoping lens to take a picture of the stick rack on the ice, but during warm-ups, because Petrie didn't come out for warm-ups because they didn't want them to know, just to see if Petrie's model of stick was sitting on the rack, and it was, and he was the only guy on the team. And what's crazy to me is we haven't heard, or the only guy on the team that uses that model of stick. And what's crazy to me is we haven't heard anything about Kucherov, when you would imagine that the hockey media is going equally as crazy.
Yeah, I mean it's the biggest story heading into the night, aside from it being a Game 7, is will the leading scorer in the postseason not be playing? We'll find out.
Yeah.
Deej, that said, we got to put predictions out there.
Yes.
Do the Tampa Bay Lightning win this series if Nikita Kucherov plays?
Yes. But
Do the Tampa Bay Lightning win this series if Nikita Kucherov does not play?
well, that's what's interesting, right? And I think more than like a single answer, there's like a few stats I'd like to rattle off here about Tampa's performance in Game 7s over the last decade.
Mm-hmm.
So they have appeared in 4 Game 7s in the last 10 years. 2010, 2011, they lose Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals to the Boston Bruins.
Yes, they did.
1-0.
Thank
1-0.
God.
They get shut out.
Thank
14-15. 14-15, they beat the Rangers in the Eastern Conference Final.
Mhm.
They win 2-0, but they still have trouble scoring. 15-16, next year, they lose to the Penguins 2-1. They only get up 1 goal. And then in 17-18, they lose to the Capitals 4-0. They get shut out. So this is a team that has extreme difficulty scoring in Game 7s. They have a total of 3 goals scored. I'm sorry, they have a total of, let me recount this. Yes, they have a total of 3 goals scored in their 4 Game 7 appearances this decade. So they are averaging .75 goals per game, and they may be going into a Game 7 tonight without their leading scorer.
I genuinely, I thought I would have more confidence in saying with certainty that the Lightning would win, but I can't. This is a complete toss-up. And I guess we can transition this then to talk about Montreal and the Vegas Golden Knights.
Yeah.
If you are Montreal, I think the answer is obvious of who you would rather see, that being the New York Islanders rather than the defending Stanley Cup champions. But is it that simple? Because I look at the style that Montreal plays, and Tampa at times has had trouble against this style. They're having trouble against this style right now. They're going to Game 7 against the New York Islanders. I can't help but think in a way, like, I'm not saying this with 100% certainty. I get the absurdity of the statement, but I don't view the Habs playing the Islanders as this incredible stroke of luck and they're so much more likely to win over Tampa. I think it's Montreal has a good shot no matter who they play, but in a way it's not quite a mirror match. But I do wonder if that mirror match of playing the Islanders might not work out in their favor because these two teams are so similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I think if you're Montreal, the matchup you want in the final is a Kucherov-less Tampa.
That's fair. That could be the right way.
I don't know. Yeah, it's so. I think Montreal matches up very well against both these teams, though, and that's what's really weird to me. I never thought I would say that, but the more I dig into it, they very much do. You have the best penalty kill we've seen in the playoffs in a very long time versus the best power play we've seen in the playoffs in a very long time. And I don't know. That's the matchup I want to see. And what's weird is that that's almost a better matchup for the Habs because Tampa's strength is easy for them to counter, and Montreal has looked very good at even strength play.
Montreal in general. I mean, it's funny because you look back at Game 5 on Tuesday night, Montreal winning that one 4-1 on the road. They were up 3-0 in that game. And, you know, Vegas got a goal early on in the third period from Max Pacioretty of all people, and you think, oh, this might be it. And then, of course, Suzuki, I think, well, I don't recall if it was an empty netter or not. I believe it was to seal the deal. Just the resilience and the ability to shut down a high-scoring offense, on paper at least, was there. And then obviously last night as well. Again, it's that resilience from the Habs to hang in there. I mean, Shea Weber got the opening goal. Riley Smith ties it less than 50 seconds later. Caulfield scores. Martinez scores. You're like, oh, God, here we go. And then they get that winner. It's just, it's one of the most unpredictable finals I can recall in a very long time. That's not to say that like Dallas Tampa last year, which, hey, everybody, remember that Dallas and Tampa were the Stanley Cup final last year? It's not to say that wasn't unpredictable, but obviously Tampa was the heavy favorite. And it's weird to say that it feels like Montreal would have a better shot than what Dallas did last year when you look at how these teams are constructed and just based off of how the season's played out. But it does feel like Montreal has a better shot than Dallas did last year.
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And I think that's because they play a different game than Dallas, where Dallas kind of plays a game a little bit similar to Tampa, where it relies on a lot of skill. Where I would say, I hate to say this because it makes me sound like an old man, but Montreal they rely on the fundamentals. Which is like,
yeah,
I hate that I just said that. It's such a boomer take, but they do. It's like,
you're not wrong, though. And then on top of that, obviously, they have the skill from there. Like the Islanders play the same way. Basic, simple hockey, but then you have the players that have the skill. I mean, God, you look at the Philip Deneau pass to Lehkonen for the series clincher against Vegas, and it's like that. It's just unbelievable skill. You know, you have that extra skill to then be able to pull it off, and that's, I think, where the difference is. And it's just it's crazy. It's just crazy. I mean, again, Montreal has a chance no matter what, and you just have so many moments with this team. A team, by the way, which I saw the stat. If Montreal goes to the Cup final and wins in 7, they will technically have a below 500 record on the year. Regular season playoffs combined, if they go to 7 and win the Stanley Cup, they technically still would have lost one more game than they won in this calendar season, which is just ridiculous. And I mean, they have the lowest winning percentage of any Stanley Cup finalist since the Minnesota North Stars in 1991. There's just so many different aspects to it. And like I said, in terms of those moments, like Marc Bergevin in his red suit, and he was freaking out last night. And it's like, look, obviously I am the furthest thing from a Habs fan, but am I going to sit there and be sheltered as a Bruins fan that I can't sit there and just be like, that's fucking cool. Like just how excited Marc Bergevin was. And look, man, like I've given Marc Bergevin a lot of crap in that, and I still believe this wholeheartedly. I truly believe the Montreal Canadiens could have won a Stanley Cup by now if they had stuck with the Paciorettys, with the PK Subbans, that core that they had. You know, you talk about them getting close, you know, that series with the Rangers that they had when the whole Chris Kreider incident happened. I still personally believe, as a Bruins fan from the outside looking in, that core could have won if you just added the right pieces. But Marc Bergevin, in pulling the chute when he did, it's like, well, okay, big risk. Let's see if he can make it pay off. And he has. He absolutely has. And I mean, obviously, directly the Suzuki pickup in the Pacioretty deal. Hell, Tatar is scratched now, and it still worked out for them. I mean, it's an interesting setup here. Just everything about this team. You talk about the thought of the officiating. You talk about, oh, here's Corey Perry getting hit in the mouth and Jeff Petrie's bloodshot eyes, and all of that encapsulated in the fact that they're the first Canadian team in the final in a decade. It'll be the first Cup final game Bell Center's ever seen. They're in the final for the first time since 93, the first time in my lifetime. Cole Caulfield became the second player in NHL history to win the Hobey Baker Award and make the Stanley Cup final in the same year. I think it was Neil Broughton in 91 with the North Stars. That was the worst one, or the worst one? The last one to do that. Arguably the worst one as well compared to Cole Caulfield. It's absolutely insane.
Well, I feel like I need to bring up a conspiracy theory, and it's not so much as a conspiracy theory as much as I guarantee you, if you really look into this, this is real. So the second Montreal wins, the camera cuts to Bergevin going nuts in his suite up at the top in the press box. 10 seconds later, maybe 12 seconds, you can count it, he is on the bench hugging Shea Weber. You tell me there is not a secret slide from his suite to the bench. There is no human being that can traverse that without the aid of a slide or fire pole. Show us the blueprints.
Oh my God. I'd love to imagine that he has a fire pole though that just goes down like 5 stories from his from the box. That's incredible.
It's seriously though, like if you look at the time between, it's literally impossible for somebody to traverse that many stairs. And you know the man's not jumping. He's wearing a suit.
And he's a former NHL player who's got wear and tear on his body. It's just, it doesn't add up, people.
It's a slide. Into a pillow pit, probably.
I was going to say, speaking of sliding, the Vegas Golden Knights right out of the playoffs again. We have to give the postmortem on the Vegas Golden Knights. I think pretty much for the most part, Deej and I have set up our thoughts on what the finals could be, what could happen in Game 7 tonight. It's all just such a toss-up. And it does kind of fit the theme now for what happens with the Vegas Golden Knights moving forward. And Deej, the thought I had heading into today's show is that they really are a victim of their own ambition.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look at those contracts they've handed out. Like, don't get me wrong, they're working out for them right now, but those are going to smack them in the face soon.
I do not blame leadership for the Vegas Golden Knights for saying, oh, wow, we were handed a gift here. Instead of taking a 3 to 5 year process with a bunch of prospects, our Eric Brandstroms, our Nick Suzuki's, look, we just made the cup final. Number one, we were given a much better team than we thought. Hey, we might make the playoffs. Holy hell, we just made the cup final. So are we going to risk regressing? Or are we going to leverage that future that we thought we had to build on to go for it now? I don't think it was the wrong choice for them to go for it now. It certainly wasn't. But obviously now, you're getting into a situation where it's a little bit interesting. Obviously, again, first season, you lose to the Caps in the finals. The next year, that Sharks collapse, which was still just absurd. They lost to Dallas in the conference finals last year, and now they lose here as well in what was essentially the conference finals. Yeah. I struggle to see where exactly they go from here. They're not going to divert from the game plan. The Vegas Golden Knights will be a playoff team next year, barring a horrific collapse. The Vegas Golden Knights will be deemed a cup contender heading into next year, barring a drastic collapse or a drastic course-altering decision. They have their first round pick this year. They don't have their second, but they do have New Jersey's. Funny enough. That would be from the Nikita Gusev trade, who, of course, the Devils let go of for absolutely nothing. They don't have their third, but they have all of their first-round picks over the next 3 drafts. They technically have $6 million in cap space. And the only people that are up, Tomas Nosek, which if they bring him back, that's $1 to $2 million tops. Matthias Janmark, I can imagine, will leave. I mean, this is a guy that he was making $2 million this year. If he's going to look for a raise, I don't think they'll pay that. The one big loss is probably going to be Alex Martinez. I think everyone's looking at him as a 33-year-old defenseman. He's coming off of a deal where he was making $4 million, and I'm sure there are people who will give him more than $4 million, and you can argue whether or not Vegas can necessarily do that. But obviously, you then get into the questions of, well, is Marc-Andre Fleury back? Because if you move that $7 million cap hit, granted there's 1 year left, that gives you a lot of maneuverability to make things happen here in this upcoming free agent class. And of course, everyone's talking about like, oh, they'll find a way to get Jack Eichel probably. But like the core of this team, I think can still compete. I don't think that's I don't think that's an absurd statement to make, by any stretch of the imagination here. You look at the roster overall. Sure, as the playoffs went on, Marc-Andre Fleury probably wasn't as consistent as you wanted him to be. Robin Lehner, I think, stepped in and did the best that he could, given the circumstances. I mean, again, you talk about going from, really with the time with the Islanders and then into Chicago and then getting traded. You go from being a starting guy towards being, the 1B to Fleury's 1A. Again, not saying he did his best. I mean, he played in 3 playoff games this postseason. He had an 8-11, a 9-64, and a 9-06 last night. It's a tough call for what they could do in goal. Defensively, I do think you're looking at that interesting situation where, I mean, you brought in Pietrangelo to go for it. You fell short of the finals, but you still have Pietrangelo and Theodore locked up. You have Braden McNabb, Haig, Whitecloud all back for next season. There's really the argument of they have one hole on defense. And I mean, they do have some guys in the system, and then obviously they have the ability to go out and probably get a free agent with the money that they have. They got a good shot. I mean, again, I think the one argument you could make is, well, when your top centers are William Karlsson, Chandler Stevenson, and Nick Waugh, yeah, maybe you do try to find a way to be able to bring in a Jack Eichel, because Eichel, Karlsson, Stevenson, that's a hell of a lot tougher to beat.
Yeah. There's 2 interesting things about this roster when I look at it, right, that I think are worth noting, especially with the Seattle expansion draft coming up. There are only 5 players left on this roster from the expansion draft, which is really interesting when you think about it. And then on top of that, there's only 1 player on this roster that is a Vegas Golden Knights draft pick, and that's Nick Hague. So really, in a weird way, McPhee and McCrimmon might be some of the best wheelers and dealers in the league, which is really interesting when you look at these albatross contracts and how they're able to fit this all together with only having 1 draft pick on this roster is absolutely nuts to me.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, they completely diverted away from their plan, and it's going to be very interesting to see what that plan is now moving forward, because again, with the money that you have tied up in some of these players, I don't necessarily think that this is the type of situation where you look to readjust. They go right back towards it. It's just a matter of how drastically different is this roster. And me personally, I'm still very much waiting with bated breath to find out what's exactly wrong with Mark Stone. Because It is either that man is incredibly roughed up, or my God, did the Montreal Canadiens do one hell of a job in shutting down an elite player in this league. But that's obviously one of the big talking points coming out of this series, is that Mark Stone had no points in the Habs series, 8 points in 19 games total. And obviously you're not going to win when Mark Stone is being, outproduced by the likes of, Kyle Palmieri for one. I mean, not that Kyle Palmieri's bad, but he doesn't get paid like Mark Stone. But Cole Caulfield has outperformed Mark Stone in these playoffs. Yoel Armia, Eric Stahl, Corey Perry, all names with more points in terms of production, obviously, than Mark Stone. So, yeah, the thought is there's got to be an injury, but we'll find out. So, yeah,
they interviewed him this morning and asked what went wrong, and Mark Stone responded, "I got skunked," which, doesn't really make you think there was an injury. Maybe he meant it literally and there was an actual incident with a skunk, but I don't know. I think that's really interesting, is it just somehow one of the most inimitable players in the league, somehow they got into his head and his game style. That's crazy to me.
Yeah. So like I said, for Vegas, I don't think it's all doom and gloom, but obviously the more you fall short of the goal, the more frustrating it's going to be. And obviously, I talked about it in the last episode. Let's just be honest. There is still this gigantic, and the only phrase I can possibly use to describe it is hate boner towards this organization, some of which is brought on by themselves, some of which is just garbage from other jealous fan bases, the exemption, for example, in the upcoming expansion draft. We'll see what happens. And it's funny that with every single team, obviously, you sit there and have the thought of, well, they could go this way, they could go this way. And with Vegas, I mean, they're one of those teams that you don't rule out a seemingly impossible move that could get done in terms of a franchise-altering deal. Like, I mean, I mentioned the whole Jack Eichel thing, and people are like, come on, how the hell would they do that? The idea of them getting Jack Eichel is not far-fetched, because how the hell did they get Mark Stone? How the hell did they get Alex Pietrangelo? It's just, they always seem to find a way to do it. Like Deej said, they are amongst the best wheelers and dealers in the league. So regardless for them, again, a lot of people won't have a ton of sympathy. I just find it to be incredibly goddamn interesting that they've fallen short once more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I don't know. And I think it's exactly what you said. They're missing a premier center. No matter what area of the game that is, I think you can look at, in my opinion, Philip Deneau is now a premier center, and you could say that all of the other teams. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but he is.
Can you imagine if the Vegas top 3 centers next year are William Karlsson, Chandler Stevenson, and Philip Deneau?
Yeah, I think that's not bad. I think that's an upgrade. So I don't know. I don't know.
Well, if you can't score goals, you might as well stop the other team from scoring anymore.
Yeah.
So with that, then I think we covered everything we can in terms of the playoffs. We have 3 other quick talking points here to get into before we call it a show. First and foremost, again, it's something else that we're not going to get into, but we would be and not going to get into because I just don't think we can necessarily do it justice, in that it is worth your focus and attention on reading these articles in full and getting this information. And it is the ongoing Chicago Blackhawks story that we mentioned before, in terms of a former video coach with the team, and the alleged sexual assault that was essentially pushed to the wayside by the Blackhawks organization. That wasn't reported. They then went on to give essentially an accommodation, a positive reference for this guy to work at this high school that he ended up being involved in an incident there as well. And of course, since then, he's been in prison. He's a registered sex offender. And, an article came out on The Athletic. It might have been late last night or early this morning, but the quote from a former Blackhawks player: every guy on the team knew about this alleged sexual assault in 2010, and nothing was done. And the implications of that, Deej, and again, we cannot say for sure in terms of some of the other people that have gone on to coach around the league. Obviously, Joel Quenneville was there at the time. Mark Bergevin was there at the time. Kevin Cheveldayoff with the Winnipeg Jets was there at the time. And of course, Stan Bowman is still there. And he's one of the guys that stands out as there is no way in hell Stan Bowman did not know. And honestly, Deej, is at the point now where it just seems like the tip of the iceberg. While we were recording, an article came out on The Athletic in regards to former NHL goaltender for the Pittsburgh Penguins, Frank Pietrangelo, not Pietrangelo, no relation to Alex, who mentioned that a coach at the University of Minnesota back in the day, sexually abused him. And this is a thing that is going to keep being brought up. And it is obviously so goddamn important for the fans of this sport to not allow themselves to just let this go to the wayside. I think we all have a responsibility as sports fans here in terms of our love of the game here in hockey to just not let this story go away. And I think you're going to keep seeing more stories like this. And obviously the stories have been there. What happened with Theo Fleury, well documented. It's very interesting how little mainstream coverage this has gotten, especially in terms of it being acknowledged by the NHL with what's going on with the Chicago Blackhawks, or at least what happened 10 years ago, and the continuing ongoing ramifications of their lack of action.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I mean, this story just gets, the web of this story gets more and more and more complicated. And I think that I got to echo Tougie's point here that this web is so complicated. The stakes are so high that I encourage you to research this and read about it yourself, because it just seems like every week another layer adds to this, or another system that should have prevented this happening failed. And we could not do it justice here. And at the same time, it's also extremely uncomfortable content.
Yes. So again, I encourage everyone, again, search Rick Westhead on TSN. You'll find his coverage of this. I called him out for what, in my opinion, was a shitty way to handle award voting. But Mark Lazarus had an article on The Athletic, which, yes, behind a paywall, but at the end of the day, I think it's still worth reading. I think, I won't plug The Athletic here unless they want to maybe get involved. But yeah, I mean, it's the information's out there, and I think it's up to a lot of people now to not pass the buck and not turn a blind eye like the Chicago Blackhawks elected to do, which is why we're still talking about this, subject and situation now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So aside from that, then, Deej, two other quick cocking points. Twit cocking points. Can that be our title, or will Spotify say no?
I mean, I was going to go with 10-cent beer night.
Fair enough. Couple other quick talking points, then, easy for me to say. Deej, the Seattle Kraken have their first head coach. It is.
Yeah, and this is
an
weird.
Interesting choice.
Yeah, it's like, I think of like have you ever watched Arrested Development? If you haven't, there's like a scene where like one of the main characters, his son, brings home his first girlfriend, and he's like, Dad, this is Anne, and then his dad just goes, her? And that's immediately how I felt when I was like, oh, they hired Dave Haxtell. I was like, him, Dave.
It's just, it's one of those questions that has to be asked. I mean, he was the head coach of the Philadelphia Flyers for over 3 years. In that time,
over 3 years.
In that time, the Flyers made the playoffs twice and lost in the first round. The Flyers lost in the first round both times they made the playoffs in 2 out of those 3 years. I just don't know. I mean, here's the thing. Heading into that time with the Flyers, a lot of people know he was with the University of North Dakota. And at that time, I mean, even still, that program from 2004 to 2015, he was there for a decade. That program was essentially a powerhouse. I mean, you have multiple first-round finishes. You have multiple Frozen Four appearances. You have a national title, if not a couple of national titles in that time.
I believe he never won the national title, which is what's crazy to me.
I'm going to blame Wikipedia for odd coloring of this. But
I when I looked this up earlier, there was like the sherbet orange and then like the macaroni orange, and it was really a poor decision for whoever made that table. But they never won a Frozen Four tournament.
Point being, perennial contenders.
Yeah.
Like really good NCAA level coach. Goes to the Flyers. And look, I appreciate the fact Philadelphia gave him the chance, because a lot of teams just would have been like, oh, hey, look, Dave Haxtell. As in modern day Dave Haxtell, where it's like, well, he was a coach before. Why not? It's just, for me, I said as much on Twitter in reaction to this, Deej. It seems like the type of move where there's no in between. It is either going to be a phenomenal move for them that's going to work out in spades, or it's going to be an outright disaster.
So this is actually, when I am thinking about this and whether or not this was like a great decision, when I think of like other head coaches that like they could have picked, I think when you see what's left of who hasn't gone somewhere, you're kind of stuck choosing between Dave Haxtell and Claude Julien. I think is really the only. I mean, you could probably throw Paul Maurice in there, but it's interesting to me how
Paul Maurice,
seems like they shockingly
hasn't been fired by Winnipeg yet.
Yeah, but you would just, that's why I said you could probably throw him in there. It's probably going to happen. But that's the thing is like when you see all the coaching hires that happened and where they went, really, everything dried up real fast. And I don't know why I think that's so weird, but I don't know. I don't know why you wouldn't go with like Bruce Boudreau, maybe. Like that, to me, that's probably who I would have picked. But I mean, again, I've never had to make a decision like this in my entire life, and I've never met Bruce. So
yeah, I mean, it's like it was one of those things where obviously we were very much on board with the idea of Gerard Gallant, but that was before the New York Rangers job became available. Which obviously, if you're Gerard Gallant, you go with the New York Rangers. Like that is a no-brainer with the base that they have already installed. You go for it, as opposed to doing, a retread of what happened with Vegas, where you might be able to make something happen. But hey, are they also just going to boot me out the door at a moment's notice? Who's to say? So Gerard Gallant going to the Rangers was the right call for him. But yeah, for the Golden Knights here, it's like, okay, Dave Haxtell, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but it's interesting. I mean, I guess, this is a guy that only got that one shot, goes back or goes to Toronto as an assistant and is now getting another shot. The term analytics believer is there as well. Maybe it is just the idea that Ron Francis is like, I think we can build something here and this guy deserves a second shot. I mean, that's what it looks like, right?
Yeah. And I guess a lot of the other very good candidates, like guys were names were tossed around like John Stevens or Mike Vellucci, and those guys had never coached an NHL, like head coached an NHL team before. And so maybe the reason for need of experience is the lack of stability. And then at the same time, because all these guys are just completely uprooting their lives and showing up, like I believe that Haxtell was actually the youngest of all the other available candidates that have previously head coached a team. So maybe he thought that would help mesh the room.
At 52 years young.
Yeah.
52 years young. But it's a tough call, right? We have no way of knowing what way this is going to go. But I mean, the description I saw that certainly feels to be that way. He's certainly a guy, but not the right guy. Time will tell if that's true.
Dave? Really? Dave? So let's let's just compound this confusing news with the next piece of it.
Yeah, our final talking point for today. I figured we'd save the most puzzling for last.
Yeah. I don't even, this is so puzzling to me that I don't have a take on it. That's the only way I can describe it. This has dumbfounded me into like him even being named a finalist was confusing to me, but Lou Lamoriello wins the Gregory, which is what I'm calling it.
Barry Trotz wins the GM of the Year award for Lou Lamoriello.
Yeah, I'm so confused. Like I almost in the background want to bring up like Lou Lamoriello's trade tracker.
So I mean, it's funny. Like you look at the Islanders in terms of the moves that were made this season. The acquisition of Paul Mary, if you want to give him credit for that, sure. But let's be honest, would that have happened if Anders Lee didn't go down? So how much credit do you want to give? I don't know. The only real thing you can give him credit for, in my opinion, is the fact that he brought over Ilya Sorokin. But at the end of the day, Ilya Sorokin's not even their playoff starter. Varlamov, if he starts Game 7 tonight, would have started twice as many games as Sorokin has in the playoffs. So how much credit do you necessarily give Lou Lamoriello and the Islanders for that? Where I don't know. I just don't see how what he did this year gets him the win. It is a reputation win. And I mean, I've made those complaints before from an EA NHL standpoint, where you have legacy ratings. And it's like, well, this guy was good 4 years ago, so let's keep him really good. Well, Lou Lamoriello's been great, but he's still great. Screw it, give him the award. Like, I'm sorry. Like, Mark Bergevin deserved it more. Obviously,
Bergevin or Zito, I would have been fine with.
Yeah, I mean, as it's gone on, go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to say there's something that makes this even more confusing. Do you know who won GM of the year last year? It's Lou Lamoriello. He's won in back-to-back years. So that makes it significantly more confusing to me because it's not like this is, so to the voters, this is not like like a career achievement award. You know what I mean? Like he got that last year. So I'm like really confused.
I mean, you can sit here and break it down, and we had that conversation over who we thought our favorites would be for GM of the year around the time that the regular season ended. But yeah, you look directly at the two other finalists. I mean, Mark Bergevin. Again, I don't necessarily give someone credit like, oh, Bergevin signed Cole Caulfield. Okay, cool. Like, more than likely, Cole Caulfield was going to sign. I don't really think that's a huge advantage. Like, we don't get the Jimmy Vesey setup all that often. We're a highly touted college prospect who's clearly like NHL ready or could play in the NHL level says no. Doesn't happen all that often. But, I mean, in terms of what I rate GMs on, like I give Mark Bergevin more credit for the Tyler Toffoli signing than I do Lou Lamoriello for the trade or bringing over Ilya Sorokin. I give him more credit for the Eric Stahl and Corey Perry acquisitions. I give him more credit for the Eric Gustafson, John Merrill pickups, who have been pretty solid in their third line. Like, and then obviously, of course, we talked about it with the Florida Panthers as well. And what, say, Patrick Hornqvist meant to the team this year, the addition of Carter Verhaeghe. I don't remember exactly when Mason Marchment was brought in, but Sam Bennett and how well he performed afterwards. Like, it's not just based off of pure moves and new acquisitions, but I just don't see how in any way on paper, Lou Lamoriello, unless this is a, hey, goodbye award, and it's his last year out of nowhere, I don't see how he did more than either of the two finalists, let alone some GMs that weren't even nominated in the final three.
What's even more interesting is I don't know if you looked into the voting breakdown, but Bergevin actually received more. He received more first place votes than Lamoriello. Just Lamoriello, just for some reason, everybody had him as the second best GM of the year for some reason.
Don't understand.
Somebody voted Kyle Dubas number one, so I what can you say?
I don't know. I just don't know.
It's weird. I mean, the awards given out. I mean, even Islanders fans are confused about this. Like the first article I read when I was like, why, was from the Sports Blog Nation Islanders thing. And they were like, yeah, we did not think this was going to happen.
I mean, it's fucking ridiculous, though, when that Jeff Gorton got as many votes. Recently fired GM of the New York Rangers, Jeff Gorton, got as many votes as Don Sweeney did for the Boston Bruins, who picked up Taylor Hall for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
Again, I have no idea who sits here and has these votes, but I would love to see the results of a mental evaluation.
Yeah, right? It's like, I don't know. Yeah, it was certainly weird. It's certainly very, very, very weird.
So, Deej, with that, I think that brings us to a close here today. Hardly the criticizing officials marathon that we previously had, but still, all in all, a decent amount of talking points. And by the end of the night, we will know who plays Montreal in the Stanley Cup Final.
That we will. The finals are set. I know they said they scheduled them. I don't remember what day that
Monday.
they begin.
Starts on Monday.
Monday.
Abs on the road, no matter what.
Monday. It's another hockey-free weekend. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, this is gonna be exciting. The season's drawing to a close. We get to pick some Kraken soon, and we get to hyper analyze single hockey games.
Get ready for some shorter shows, everybody.
Well, the shows won't be the only thing that's shorter. Thanks to Manscaped, where you can use code Tougie. That's right, TOUGIE for 20% off at manscaped.com. Manscaped, home of the lawnmower, the weed whacker, home of the ultra smooth package, home of refined, the scent that my girlfriend doesn't hate. Manscaped, your balls will thank you. 20% off, code Tougie, manscaped.com. Thank you to everybody that's been using our code. Tougie, do you have a final thought?
I really don't want the Habs to win the Stanley Cup, but they're probably going to win the Stanley Cup.
Well, if I've learned anything from history, it's that you can't root for the Blues. The Greens are obviously the people's choice. And I think Montreal, I don't know if that's how Protanopia works, but I believe they are the Greens in this situation, with Tampa being obviously the Blues. So you know what? Eat shit, Emperor Julian. Where go Habs go? Maybe. I don't know.
See you next week, everyone.